Paul.
Well, thank you for that setup, Elena. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Tevis. I'm based in Santa Barbara, California. If you are wondering, this is not a virtual background behind me. My home office is a children's playhouse in our backyard. Um, so that door you see behind me actually only comes up to about here on me. So I have this nice little Alice in Wonderland sort of space that I work in here. I like to address that right off the front because otherwise people are going, where is he? What's going on there? So now that I've got that cleared up, I'm excited to be here tonight talking with you all about a couple of topics that are really important to me in the work that I've done over the last 20 plus years. We're going to be digging a bit into some stuff around some things from the DevOps space, some stuff from culture, from stuff from leadership development, things that I'm really intrigued by, and stuff that work that I do as a coach and consultant with my clients. We will be doing some spots here where I'm going to share some slides and I'm going to ask some questions, both to raise your hand in Zoom and also doing some stuff in chat. And there'll be a spot later where there's an optional we can pop into Miro if you want to do a little bit of an opt-in exercise on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, make sure that everything is working here, that I've got everything set up that I need. If you can give me a thumbs up to let me know you can see this, either with your, as a friend of mine likes to say, with your digital thumb or your meat thumb, either of those. Great. Okay, great. So as I said, my name is Paul Tevis. I'm here to talk tonight about 3 heuristics for fostering high trust generative culture. So I want to do a little gauge of knowledge off the top here. So 3 questions. First question, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you've read the 2023 Accelerate State of DevOps report. Anyone? Okay, great. And again, there's no judgment around any of these questions. It's partly just to get a sense of I can speed up or slow down in various spots depending on what where we want to spend time. So just want to gauge that a little bit. Great. So a few people. Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you've heard of Ron Westrum and Westrum's typology of organizational culture. Anyone? Okay, great. I'm glad you heard of it, Alina, since we talked about it a bit.
Since we talk, yeah, that I went and I learned about it.
Exactly. And given the show of hands that I saw in the last one, I'm guessing there's nobody here whose organization has said, you know, what we really want is to strive towards having this Western generative culture. Okay, great. So let me explain a little bit where we're coming from. So who is Ron Westrum and why does this matter? So Dr. Westrum's a safety researcher out of Ypsilanti in Eastern Michigan University. He's worked in the study of complex and safety critical systems for decades. One of the pioneering figures. A lot of his work is then been built on by people like Amy Edmondson and other folks to sort of look at how it is and the cultural practices that exist in organizations that lead to the sorts of results that we do or don't want. And one of his sort of key areas of research has pointed to the fact that information flow predicts organizational outcomes, that if you actually look at how information flows in an organization, you can predict a number of things about how well that organization functions from a safety perspective. And this is in things like nuclear engineering, in healthcare, in manufacturing systems, places where real human lives are at risk. And so we actually need to look at how information is flowing, and that allows us to predict what the safety outcomes are going to be in those organizations. And so as part of his work, he developed an instrument for assessing information flow and culture. And developed this thing that a lot of people refer to as the Western cultural typology. And this is it. This is the thing you may have seen before. And he said, basically, when we look at organizational cultures through the lens of information flow, because there are many, many different ways we could look at organizational culture. But if we look at it through this lens, he says there are basically 3 buckets that organizations fall into that we can look at based on their organizational behaviors. And he says those buckets are, and his original terms are pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. each of those has an orientation to them, right? Pathological cultures are really oriented around power, particularly power of individuals within that organization. These things are never explicitly said, but it's if you look at the behaviors that happen in a culture like that, right, where there's low degrees of cooperation, messengers are often shot, right? Responsibilities are avoided or shirked. There's not a lot of bridging that happens between different parts of the organization. Failure often leads to scapegoating, right? We need someone to blame. Blamestorming is one of my least favorite activities in an organization, right? And novelty is often crushed. He says no one would say that that's what we want. And yet there are a large number of organizations and subcultures within larger organizations that effectively function this way. And he says we also have bureaucratic organizations, which are really rule-oriented, right? This is about making sure that we follow the rules, and that's kind of the most important visible thing. And there we see a higher degree of cooperation, but messengers tend to, they're not necessarily shot, but they're often neglected. They aren't listened to. Responsibilities tend to be fairly narrow. Bridging is tolerated, but it's not like people are going out of their way to say, we really need to be cross-functional about this. We really need to have these boundary spanning actions, things like that. Failure is, we're not necessarily looking for a scapegoat, but we want to find out who wasn't following procedures and make sure that they're brought to justice. And novelty in these situations often introduces problems because these are things that don't conform to the rules that we already have. So in a bureaucratic culture, those are the sorts of things that we see. And finally, Westrum talks about what he calls a generative culture, which is actually really oriented towards organizational outcomes. It's performance oriented, where you see high degrees of cooperation. Messengers are trained. People are taught how to raise problems and how to bring up the fact that there are issues. Risks are shared amongst individuals and different parts of the organization. Bridging is encouraged. When something unexpected and undesirable happens, it leads to inquiry, not out of a sense of wanting to find someone to blame, but actually from the sense of wanting to find how do we improve for next time? What can we learn from this failure? And then when things that are novel are often implemented, right, are taken forward when they actually produce better results than they did before. So that's a high-level view of Westrum's organizational culture. Again, coming out of the realm of safety research. Before I go on, any questions, comments? Anybody wants to toss into the chat or just raise your hand and say, could you explain a little bit more about that? All right, well, let's move on then. So the reason why I started off by asking about the 2023 State of DevOps report is that if we actually go all the way back to the beginning of the State of DevOps research, one of the first places where Westrum's research was really looked at in terms of digital organizations, companies that were building and deploying software, in the 2024 State of DevOps report, they actually did a bunch of research where they were looking at to what degree does DevOps culture, to what degree is that impacted by this sort of idea of this Westrum topology? And effectively what they found was, just as that information flow study predicted safety outcomes in safety-oriented organizations, it also predicted outcomes and organizational performance in IT, right? And in software delivery. That the more further right you were sort of along that spectrum, the more likely it was that you were actually going to get the kind of results you were looking for. And they said, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but it was nice to see it validated by the research. And in fact, this has been studied almost every year that they've done a State of DevOps report, starting with Puppet Labs was the people who were doing it initially, and then that eventually became the Dora group, and then that eventually became now done inside Google. And so getting to Google Cloud, the 2023 Accelerate State of DevOps report, they found once again, every year they've studied it, that organizations with generative culture from the Westrum standpoint have better results on basically everything you care about. They said, they have 30% higher organizational performance than teams without it. So as much as DevOps is often focused on technical practices. The point is that the cultural practices that make it up are as important as the technical practices that enable it. And so actually, if you look at the things that they studied in 2023, right, we see that this is that having a generative culture from Westrum's standpoint is the only thing they studied that has a strong positive effect on every good thing they were looking for. And so this is strong evidence that we should care about this kind of stuff if we actually care about organizational performance, that we need to be looking at, again, this is the cultural lens here is about information flow. Are we making sure that information gets to where it needs to be when people need it so that they can act on it? That's what this is at its core about. And if you go to the Dora core model, which if you've dug into this, these are the various things that they study. And most people are familiar with the things in the green box here, the 4 Dora metrics, right? Which is measure of software delivery performance. But what you're seeing in this diagram here is what the research says actually are contributing factors in a statistically significant and also well-reasoned way. I had the opportunity to hear Nicole Fosgren and Jess Humble talk about Dora right after the book Accelerate came out. And Dr. Fosgren, is a trained statistician, and she wanted to be very clear about this is not spurious correlation, right? That there is actually a causal theory for why these things are connected that is explained and borne out by the data. And so if we look down here in this red box, right, we can see this idea of this generative organizational culture. The only technical capability that influences it is continuous delivery, right? It sort of stands by itself, but leads to better software delivery performance, better organizational performance, and better well-being, right, inside your organization. And of course, the reason why continuous delivery is one of the things that's sort of covariant with it is that if you are not willing to deal with the fact that continuous delivery practices are going to reveal shortcomings in your system, and you're not ready to talk about failure and you're not ready to learn from it, you're going to stop doing continuous delivery real quick. And so there's a strong, it makes sense, like that it's sort of the thing that you need in order to be able to take advantage of all of these technical capabilities. And that's fundamentally what the state of DevOps folks are saying about the Westrum generative culture, right? That we need to act, we need to have these organizational behaviors to take advantage of these technical practices in such a way that they actually lead to the outcomes that we say that we want as an organization. So that's really the key here, right? And so that leads to the question of, great, so how do we do that, right? If we're interested in having this type of culture, what can we actually do that will help us get there, right? If we all agree, yeah, this is wonderful, but what are our levers for action? How can we do that? And so this is a question that my colleague Allison Pollard and I spent a lot of time thinking about, because it's wonderful to see these models and sort of that make sense of these intuitions that we have, but it can also leave us feeling like there's nothing we can do about it, right? What we really want are some levers for action. How can we, even if our organization doesn't care about shifting culture in this way, but we care and the people around us care, what can we do to foster that culture? What can we do without any organizational buy-in? What are the things that individuals can do to start to shift it? And that's the question that Allison and I have really been spending a lot of time working on in the last year and a half or so. One of the things that we come back to a lot from John Shook, who was a pioneering lean thinker. He was at NUMMI, who really learned a lot from the way that Toyota approaches culture, right? And someone who once asked him, how do you change the culture of your organization? And he says, don't start by trying to convince people to think differently. What you actually want to do is start acting differently, which will cause people to then re-examine the beliefs that they have about what works. And he says, it's easier to act your way to a new way of thinking than to think your way to a new way of acting. And this is fundamentally one of the things that I dig into a lot in the Agile space, where I will admit I have a very tiny soapbox when people talk about the importance of the Agile mindset. My thing is, what's important is that we actually behave in an Agile fashion. And if your assumptions and beliefs and thinking are getting in the way of actually behaving that way, then yes, we probably need to do some work on that. But often the easiest way to shift that behavior is to start doing those things, notice that good results happen from them, and then go, maybe we were incorrect about believing that we had to work in large batches, or that it was more efficient to do things this way. So this is what a lot of the inspiration that Allison and I take from the idea of lean culture change is, what are things that people can do that can actually start to change the way that we think, that starts to create this cultural shift. Because that's where we want to go, right? If the idea is we want to find actions that we as individuals can take to start to move towards that generative culture that gets us those better outcomes, what are those things? So really quick, before we go on a little bit more, I'm going to ask a question that I will ask you at several points throughout here, and you can just put in chat here. We've given a little bit of introduction. What's been useful to you so far and what you heard here tonight? Just go ahead and put in the chat. Like, what are you thinking about? What's useful for you? What's shown up where you go, I hadn't thought about that before. Oh, I can see shifting that way. I'm gonna defer on the DevSecOps question until the end. We'll get there. All right. Starting with actions. Great. Mm-hmm. I gave this talk at DevOps Day, a version of this talk at DevOps Day LA in March. And it was really interesting seeing people go, wait, there's culture in DevOps? And some of us have just, been around it for long enough going, yes, it's an important part of it. Yeah. Yeah, the Dora part is a pet peeve of mine that a lot of people ignore. That, I mean, one, it's a measure of delivery. It's not actually a measure of how well you develop software. If you actually go look at what folks were talking about, for example, in the DevOps handbook, right? They're really looking at a part of your process that you can apply lean style continuous improvement to, where it should be mechanical. You shouldn't have to think about it, right? That is the sort of thing, but that's not the only part of your process. That is an enabling skill, an enabling capability for then being able to develop in really fast cycles and learn from your customers. So great. Already people are starting to think about stuff. You're giving me things that I hadn't necessarily considered before. Let's go into this a little bit. All right. It seems like I've piqued your curiosity. All right. Go back into my screen share here. So what I want to talk about next may seem a little strange from where we've just come from, but it is what I think the locus of control for starting to shift culture, which is conversations. Fundamentally, conversations are the things that manifest an organization's culture. They allow you to see and to hear what the organization's culture is really like. And also they are levers for cultural change. That if we start to shift our conversations and we start to shift the kind of things that we're talking about and the ways that we talk about them, that feeds back in. So that's a place, and that is a place that each of us can take action. Even when if we have no budgetary authority, we don't have, a huge decision-making ability within our organization, we can each shift how we show up in the conversations that we have with the folks who we work with day in and day out. And so that's where Allison and I put a lot of our focus. Because as it turns out, conversations, I guess, are hard. I have all three of these books. Has anybody seen these before? Crucial Conversations, Difficult Conversations, Fierce Conversations. Anybody read any of these? I recommend all of them. Like there's good stuff in each of them, because conversations are difficult. Interpersonal communication is a challenge. particularly when we're talking about unpleasant things like the deployment didn't work properly, or the uptake on this feature has not been what we hoped it would be, or we have yet another outage. Conversations around those sorts of things can be really hard. And as much as I love the material that's in all three of these books and in several others, it can be really hard to hold on to, right? Crucial Conversations has 7 steps that you're supposed to go through as you're having a conversation. Difficult Conversations has these sort of 4 different framings of the way you might have a conversation. And so that stuff is all useful, but hard to hold in your heads, particularly in situations where we're under stress, where things are coming at us pretty quickly. And if you've ever worked in an environment where you have live systems that are up and running all the time, you know that maintaining calm under stress and anxiety is important and challenging. So one of the places that we've gone with thinking about this is this idea of heuristics. So heuristics, aka rules of thumb, probably made most famous recently by the late Daniel Kahneman. Actually, between the last time I gave this talk and this talk, he passed away. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, despite the fact that he was a psychologist. Really popularized and laid the groundwork for what we now know as behavioral economics. But fundamentally, what Kahneman said was, look, we have these mental shortcuts that we use for complex situations. In general, we're not logicking our way through all of these things. We couldn't. Our brains we would die, like we would use up too much glucose, right? And so what happens is very often in complex situations, under conditions of stress, anxiety, uncertainty, we use rules of thumb to reduce cognitive load, right? And they quickly produce good enough results. And in fact, we find that that's a way that we can approach these difficult conversations that we may need to have in order to shift our culture. And so Allison and I have put together what we call these 6 traps and then 3 heuristics for staying out of them that we can actually hold in our heads while we're having these conversations. So it'll be, I'm going to walk you through each of these so that you can hopefully hold on to them and that you can use them in your upcoming conversations. So we're going to start by walking through these traps, which come in pairs, and then the heuristic that is the way that we try to help people keep out of them. So in specific, the way that what I want to be clear about is these traps and these heuristics are about how you show up in a conversation for other people, how they experience you. This is not about your own inner experience during the conversation. This is about how you show up out here, how they interpret and perceive and experience you. So what I'm going to ask you to do as we're walking through this is to kind of hold that mirror up to yourself and to think to yourself, do I come across that way at times? Do I show up this way? Would someone describe me that way if they were being uncharitable and didn't like me very much? You get the idea. So we're going to go through each of these, and we're going to start with one of my favorites. This is a trap that we call vague. So when someone experiences you as vague, it means fundamentally they don't know what it is you think, what it is you feel, what it is you want, what conclusions you have come to, if you've even come to any of them, what data you have has led you to those conclusions, right? When someone experiences you as vague, they really aren't sure what you are and aren't saying. This can sound like things like, well, just the details don't matter. Just fix it, right? Or, well, something nice would be good. I'm curious. Does anybody maybe see themselves a little bit in vague? And if so, how might what's a phrase in chat? What's something that you might say that someone might experience as vague? I guess. Yep. We could do something like that, I guess. What else? Could be like a lot. Yeah. One of the one of the ways that I show up as being vague is not making explicit what my preference is about something. You know, that I will often do the, well, what do you think we should do? And not, and then never contributing the, what I would really like is. So the other person may not even realize that they don't know what it is that I'm thinking. Yeah. And this is particularly a trap for managers, right, who don't set clear expectations, but have them. All right. So at the other end of that slider, we notice that another trap is to be rigid, right? To when someone experiences you as rigid, they know exactly what you think, right? And the problem is the vision that you've laid out is so detailed, there's no room for the other person in there, right? There's no room for their idea, for their feedback, for their concerns about what might show up, right? So rigid often sounds like, look, we're doing this my way. What else might rigid sound like? When you've experienced someone who you would describe as rigid, what are the sorts of things that you have heard them say? Oh yeah, Logan's already gone there, right? These all can vary by the perceiver, right? So this is about how you land with the other person. That's dumb. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, the point is that they do vary. You know, that I might, there are two different people who might experience me saying exactly the same things. One experiences me as vague and the other one is rigid. This is actually one of the cases where cross-cultural communication is really important because it's about how the message lands with the receiver, right? How they interpret it. And so you have to be aware of that. Yeah. So the heuristic that we come up with, yeah, hmm. Yeah. The heuristic that we come up with around this is we actually want to strike a balance, right? We want to be somewhat, as usual, somewhere in the middle is probably where it's useful to be. So what we want to focus on is being clear. And when we're clear, the other person experiences us in the sense that they know what it is that we're saying, they know what we think, feel, or want. They also know how strongly we feel that way. They understand where we are open to influence and where we're not. They understand how to engage with us around the idea that we have. So being clear can be things like, I'm not just giving you my conclusion, I'm giving you the data and the assumptions that conclusion is based off of, so that you can see how I got to where I am and point out where the logic might not hold up. Um, clarity doesn't mean certainty either. We can actually be very clear about what we don't know. Right? We know these things and we absolutely don't know those and we can't. Right? That's clarity. It means that it's not the same as certainty. I sometimes go back to Douglas Adams' line from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was, we demand rigidly defined areas of uncertainty and doubt. Where we know this is, and this is an important thing, right? We can absolutely say, we know these things happen, we don't know anything about this. So clarity can sound like things like what I need from you is, right? Or I know that you have concerns and I've made the decision that we're going to proceed down this route anyway. What we know is and what we don't know is. So there's when we're striking that balance, when the other person is experiencing us as clear, good things can happen. And if we go back to this idea of the Westrum generative culture, what what might being clear help with in terms of that right-hand column? If we're talking about clarity as an individual behavior, what are the organizational behaviors that it might contribute to? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Clarity is actually really important for cooperation because we actually know we make clear asks. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Right. And we also communicate clearly around what we're going to do. Yeah. What else? Failure leading to inquiry. Right. We can we can actually get clear about what did and didn't happen. Yep. Yeah. So this is a thing where it's like as if we're starting to see more of these individual behaviors where people are experiencing each other as clear. This was sort of my oop, well, there we go. My obvious ones, right? Where we also when we're clear, that's one of those ways we train our messengers, right? We can tell them when a problem comes up, here's how I want you to talk about it. Here's the information I want you to share because that's what's going to be useful. Here is what we need to do. So yeah. So that's one set of traps and one heuristic. So I want to dig into the second heuristic and the second pair of traps. So that first spectrum that you saw back at the beginning is about what you think and what you feel and what's going on for you. The next pair we're going to dig into is about the person you're interacting with. So one of the traps here is that the other person can experience you as uninterested because you're not asking about their perspectives or their ideas, their feelings, the data they're working from, what their experience of the situation is. And so when I experience someone as uninterested, right, I'm not getting the opportunity to share what's happening for me or what I'm noticing or my expertise. I might hear things like, well, that's not how we do things here. If you've ever been in a situation where someone was where you read them as uninterested, what have you heard? What might uninterested sound like? Uh-huh. S Scrolling through their phone instead of listening. Yep. I think some of us have been on the receiving end of uninterested. So one of the things to notice here is that you can actually fall into multiple traps at the same time. Right? It's possible to experience someone as rigid and uninterested at the same time because they're so fixated on their own idea and laying that out that they're not actually open to, and not asking about other ideas you have. That's actually a pretty common pairing, right? Rigid and uninterested. But vague and uninterested is like, there's nothing there, right? They're not telling you what they think. They're not asking what you think. You're like, are we ever going to get around to what are we really talking about here? So there's another trap, unsurprisingly, along that same spectrum. And this is what we call interrogating, right? So they're not only asking questions about what you think and what you feel and what's going on with you. They're asking so many of them, and they're asking them in such a way that you don't want to answer them, right? That often because their questions might hint at blame or judgment, that it's dangerous to actually share what it is that you think or want in this particular situation. So one of my favorites is always the like, well, why would you do it that way? Right? It's a question, but it's not really a question, right? If you've ever been on the receiving end of this, what might interrogating sound like? Yeah, why is actually a really dangerous question here. What other things might interrogating sound like? This is where I could start to say things like, we have ways of making you talk. But that would be self-defeating. Yeah. Hmm. Just want to help. I'm curious. This I just want to help often occurs along with this. Um, I'm imagining in that there is that when you experience the other person is interrogating, they say that they want to help, and you have doubts about that. Like there's something about the way that you're receiving it where it's like, yeah, exactly, right? And this is dangerous, right? Because they may not intend it, but ultimately their intent doesn't matter. What's mattering is the way that it's landing. So once again, our heuristic here is there's some useful middle ground there, right? And we call this being curious. So being curious is when you're expressing an interest in what the other person thinks or feels in such a way that they actually open up about it, right? That the information flows, that you find out what they're thinking, what their ideas are, where things might have gone wrong. All right. So it can be things like, so what did you notice? Or like, what do you recommend? How important is this to you? Right? As a way of actually asking about feelings without using the F word. Where else might this happen? We're getting data flowing here. So if we think about that idea of data flow, right? Again, if we go back to the idea of if people really experience each other as curious rather than uninterested or judgmental or interrogating, what generative culture outcomes and behaviors might this contribute to? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Failure leading to inquiry is the canonical one here. That's really obvious.
Yeah, Paul, remind me what bridging means.
Bridging is about bridging across usually organizational spans, right? So it's like, for example, in DevOps, right? It's like developers and ops folks actually talk to each other, or finance and development are actually open about like, hey, we need to figure out how we're gonna deal with CapEx for these sorts of things. So bridging is about breaking out of organizational silos in a cross-functional way that contributes towards the work. That help, Ron?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like these are the big ones that I tend to see, right? Again, this idea that messengers are trained, right? That we get curious about new stuff that comes up, right? So we might actually implement these ideas as opposed to going, well, we've always done it this way, right? Which is often what the novelty not being implemented is often the uninterested failure mode, right? But bridging is encouraged by curiosity because when we start to get curious about what's happening over there, like what's the impact downstream, or what's going on, can we talk to the folks who are upstream of us to figure out what's, and they're actually interested to hear what we have to say. So curiosity is sort of key to those things as well. So again, these are organizational behaviors that sort of link back to individual behaviors. So last pair here. So those first pairs are about information flow, right? They're about, am I sharing what is that I'm thinking in a way that other people can take it in and engage with it usefully? And am I actually getting curious about what's going on out there and drawing it towards me in such a way that I can interact with it and we can work on it together? This last pair is more about the relational frame than about the informational. Because again, these traps show up multiple ones at the same time. So when I experience somebody as distant, or when somebody experiences me as distant, it means that I might know what they think about something, but I don't seem to care, right? I might have the information, but it doesn't seem to affect me, right? What they care, what they think about, what they want, right? It just doesn't matter, right? Or sometimes it's like I'm sharing something that doesn't seem relevant to what they're working on, right? I'm off in my own little world and I'm talking, but I'm not really having a conversation with them. I'm not really there with them. So I'm curious, what might distant sound like? Interesting. Not really. But you know, like the distant often shows up. You can like read, you can see the subtext, right? You know, they say one thing and what's actually going on is, uh-huh. Yeah, sure. Yeah, changing the subject is another one, right? It's like whatever you're talking about, I don't really care about. We're moving on to this other thing. Yeah, exactly. Right. At the other end from distant, though, is this thing that best term that Allison and I have been able to come up with to describe this is what we call glued, which is the care too much space, right? So this is actually where when someone is experiencing me as glued, it seems like I can't move separately from them, right? I care too much about their opinions or their feelings. I've sometimes had this described to me by particularly senior engineering leaders, that their teams just, people hang off of their every word and they casually throw it out an idea and they come back, 2 weeks later to discover the team has now run down the route of implementation on it, when that wasn't what they were intending at all, because the team was really glued to what it was this executive was saying. We also sometimes see this with, there's a reason why we didn't call it enmeshment, because that is precisely what we're thinking about here: enmeshment, codependency. But fundamentally, like the issue here is that you're expressing your degree of connection in a way that doesn't really acknowledge that you are separate from the other person in some ways, underboundaried. Exactly, those kinds of things. So you've got this. People understand this. So just to point out, like where the useful place we find is being connected. Yeah, clingy. Right. So connected means that when the other person experiences me as connected, it means they know I'm there with them, but I'm not stuck to them, right? I'm separate, but interdependent. And that's the useful place to be, because this is where I can be clear. For example, as a manager, I can say, this is the problem. You may not want to hear this. You need to know that this behavior is not acceptable. And I want to work with you to figure out what we can do about it, right? So I'm not being distant in that I'm not saying, this is your problem, you figure it out, right? But I'm also not being glued by not telling you the thing because I don't know that you can handle it. Or I'm saying, I'm not downplaying it and saying it's not a big deal. So being connected is about finding that right spot in the relational space where you can actually talk about things that the other person may not want to hear, but in a way that they know that they're not feeling abandoned by you. Right. So connected can sound like things like, thank you for bringing this up, right? Or I'm expressing an understanding of what matters to you. It seems like what's important to you about this is, right? Or I'm being proactive and noticing, hey, this might matter to your group, right? And I'm not just going, that's not my problem, right? But at the same time, I'm also not making it my problem and I'm not stealing it. Asking how you can help can be a great way of being connected. But at the same time, I've worked with a couple of managers who have a tendency to be pretty boundaryless, and the way that they help people, they actually steal their problems. And so as a result, they end up being super overworked because they're trying to take care of all these things instead of actually helping people to solve the problems themselves. So if we go back to this idea of, hey, when we show up as connected in our conversations, what are the things? Yeah, Ron's ahead of me here, right? What might being connected contribute to in terms of our Westrum generative culture? What are the things that might show up? Yep, bridging. Yep. Yeah, risks being shared. Yeah, these are the sorts of things that we tend to see, right? And this is also one of those things where failure leads to inquiry. And part of that is about is that when we're connected, we start to see why a perfectly reasonable person would have done exactly that in exactly that situation, right? We're less likely to blame people for system failures. And if you've done any of the digging into safety culture, Sidney Decker's work, John Allspaw's stuff, we really start to see we need to come to understand what are the, well, Sidney Decker has a wonderful book called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. And he puts human error in scare quotes every time he mentions it, because he feels that it's not a useful category of error for actually learning about how systems fail and for actually improving them. That we generally stop learning when we get to that point. And staying connected is actually one of the ways that we can work through that. So that's the whole thing in terms of the 6 traps and the 3 heuristics that we tend to use in terms of ways that we can show up in our individual conversations in ways that when we do that over and over again, we start to shift organizational patterns more towards that Westrum style generative culture, even when our organization hasn't said they're interested in something like that. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a moment. I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to ask the question again that I asked you earlier. We've gone for a little bit here. What's been useful so far in what you've experienced, what you've heard, what you've thought about? I just encourage you to put something in chat there. Meanwhile, I'm going to take a drink of water out of my excessively large water bottle. So I'm going to give you an opportunity now to deepen your learning a little bit more if you'd like to. This is an opt-in thing. I'm going to put a link to a Miro board in the chat here. And we're going to play with the 3 C's a little bit here with these heuristics. So I'm going to do a screen share in just a moment. And I have no one will be able to tell who you are in this Miro board. So this is perfect. This is nicely anonymous. If you want to participate, you can. There is no need to. But it is often interesting to see how this goes. So here's what I'd invite you to do. Those of you who are popping into the Miro board here, what I invite you to do, I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we're all seeing here. Those of you who aren't in the Miro board can pay attention to this over here. And I will go ahead and turn off the cursors. Move. Right, so I can't see those. So here's what we're going to do. I'd invite you to think about a conversation that you had recently. Ideally, this is a work conversation that didn't necessarily have a great outcome, right? It's a conversation where there was some room for improvement. One of the ways that Allison and I often talk about conversations and interactions in the workplace is about being productive. And by productive, what we actually mean is they moved forward the work that we needed to do, and they did it in such a way that we are more able to work together in the future. All right. This is influenced by a lot of the thinking of Richard Hackman, who talks about high-performing teams. He says high-performing teams are not only those that produce results that leave their clients, their customers, satisfied with their quantity, quality, and timeliness. They also do it in such a way that they become more capable of working together in the future. And I'm sure many of us have been in an environment where we've been part of a group that accomplished what it was we were asked to accomplish and said, I'm never working with any of those people ever again. That's the thing we want to avoid. We want to do both, right? We want to do the work in a way that builds the relationship. So I want you to think about a conversation you may have had recently, an interaction where that isn't quite what happened. That was the goal and you didn't get there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to think about, how did you experience the other person in the conversation? And you'll notice that just off to the left here, there are some colored shapes. So if you're on the board, pick one of the colors and shapes, and just, invite you to move onto this. I'm going to take the triangle down here. How did you experience the other person in that conversation? All right. So if you experience them as vague and uninterested and glued, which would be very interesting, you'd move those things over there. So go ahead and pick a color and shape. Think about the conversation. Think about how you experience the other person, and go ahead and drag those colored shapes over onto this board here. And this is one of those things where, as I said before, right? It's like you can fall into all three, you can fall into three traps at the same time. Rigid and uninterested, always a popular pair. Give folks just a few more minutes, a minute or two more. Finish filling this out. If you're the green circle, I'd invite you to figure out where they landed on clear and connected. Since they probably weren't just uninterested. Think about, right, again, along the clear line, you're thinking about how well did you know what it was that they thought and felt, what their opinions were, and how much room did you see for yourself in that picture? For curious, it was, how much did they actually create an environment where you were able to share what you were thinking, what you were working on, what you were thinking, what you were feeling? And in terms of being connected, to what degree did they express the appropriate amount of interest and care in terms of what was going on with you and how it was affecting you? So we're starting to see how that maps out. The fun part, of course, is that I'm going to ask you to go the other way, which is, in that conversation, how do you think they might have experienced you? We've got another set. Feel free to please grab the same shape, the same and the same color. How do you think they would have described you in that conversation? How you would have shown up? To what extent did you lay out what you were thinking and feeling and wanting and the data that you had, but doing it in a way that left room for them? To what degree were you asking about what information they had, what their perspective was, what ideas that they had, in a way that you were actually getting that information from them, and they weren't feeling like you were interrogating them. To what degree were you expressing that you were separate but interdependent? How do you think they experienced you? I'm going to bring folks down to this lower board here. Give you a minute to just fill out. How did they experience you? All right. So those of you who opted into that, you had a little bit of an opportunity to dig into the thing that we kind of do next, right? Which is the like, this model is really great, but my supposition to you was that this is something you can actually use, right? You can do something with this. And that second question there about how do you think the other person experienced you is actually the key thing to actually putting this into use, to recognizing, as someone mentioned earlier, you know, you might use exactly the same words with one person and they think you're vague, and to someone else you're being rigid. And so actually recognizing that you've got to build in kind of a feedback loop to figure out, how am I landing with this person? So I want to give you just a little bit more about how we can potentially put this into action, and then we'll open things up for questions and anything else that's coming up for folks, and we'll dig into and we'll wrap up here. So I'm going to go back to the last few things. So as we kind of talked about, right, the thing that we find is that when others experience you as clear and curious and connected, right, you promote the types of organizational behavior that are described by Westrum's generative culture. And part of the thing about recognizing in that loop of the conversation, when things don't go well, right, when you're not actually doing things that are moving in that direction, it's unlikely that you're being clear, curious, and connected and the other person isn't, right? It takes two to tango. So part of it is recognizing how you can shift your own behavior in ways that are going to shift other people's behavior. And that's actually your leverage there for starting to create more of those organizational behaviors. And as we kind of said, right, in practice, the 3 C's are not really independent, right? Oftentimes when you move one of them, it shifts the others. So for example, if you are moving from being in order to move from being distant to being connected, you often actually need to become more clear. Right? You can't just say, oh yeah, I'm just going to become more curious from being uninterested. It's going to have an effect on the other two as well. So we represent them as three sliders, but they interact with each other. So a thing that you can do is before you go into a conversation with somebody, you can think about, given what I know about myself and the other person and the topic, if I just YOLO this, where am I likely to end up? Right? By default, how are they likely to experience me? Right, and you might lay it out on a little grid here. I've got a worksheet that I'll share with you at the end that we like to use for this. All right, and then you can go, okay, I'm probably going to show up and they're going to experience me as more vague than clear because of the ways that I tend to say things around them, right? Or they're going to experience me as interrogating rather than curious, things like that. So you can think about, where am I likely to show up? If I want to show up as clear, curious, and connected, which sliders do I need to move in what direction? And then here's the important part. That needs to do something other than just shift your mindset around this, to think the way you think about it. It actually needs to shift not just what's in your head, but what comes out, like what happens, what comes out of your mouth, what you do with your body. It needs to actually shift your behavior, because that's what people experience. So far as I know, I've never actually worked with a mind reader, and that's good. What it means is if I want someone to experience me differently, I have to do something different, right? I have to exhibit different behavior. So this is a bonus heuristic that we give people. Sometimes we talk about being behavioral, right? We say things like, oh, what would a video camera describe? Or if someone was standing in the door, you know, what would they note? And we just like to make it really simple. Behavior is something you can do, say, or ask. If it's not something you do, say, or ask, it's probably not a behavior. And so we said, great, if you want to be less vague and more clear, what do you need to say, for example? What are the words that you actually need to use in order to move that slider? So do, say, and ask is our first bonus heuristic here. So we can use this also then during a conversation. When I notice that the other person seems to be experiencing me as a little rigid, what might I say, or what might I ask? How might I make that adjustment? What might I do to indicate, actually, I'm not as set on this as you might think that I am. And here's how I can shift that. Right? So what can I do, say, or ask in the middle of the conversation? This is the really key part, because you also don't necessarily get to plan for every conversation. Some conversations find you. So actually, how do you deal with that? Right. And then after the conversation, you might go, well, that didn't go how I was hoping it would. And this is actually what I had you start to think about in that exercise. How did they experience me? And what did I do, say, or ask that got me to that point? Right. I'm pretty sure they experienced me as uninterested. What did I do or not ask that that led to that? And then how might I improve that for next time? So this is the second bonus heuristic, a thing we call PDR, just plain dance retro. You can actually use the 3 C's before a conversation, during a conversation, and after the conversation for each of these points. Right? So you can figure out, when I know that a challenging conversation is coming, how do I show up as the most useful version of me? How am I most likely to show up as being clear, curious, and connected? When I'm in the conversation and I notice that it's going sideways, what are things that I can do to get back to that place? And afterwards, what are things that I can do to learn to improve for next time? So we find that these heuristics that are useful there as well. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. I'm going to share something with you just right here at the end. But I want to open things up to questions. I see there's already one question here in the chat. And actually, I'm going to ask if you'd come off mute and just give me a little bit more flavor around your question here. When you say, would this approach work with a bully too?
Yeah, so I had an experience with someone not very recently, but a year ago, and I've tried every method I could to work along with him, and I was getting a bullish personality from him. He was basically controlling the team,
Mhm.
saying what he wants. He pointed out he has ADHD from the start. I point out I appreciate sharing that with me. Then he started he was actually everything we were talking about was about him from
Mhm.
his side. Everything we were going over was
Uninterested, right?
right, uninterested.
Right.
Everything was about him. Anything we were saying from
Mhm.
any part of the team, anybody. And
Mhm.
then he basically converted the team into becoming a yes man
Mhm.
toward him.
Mhm.
And
Which,
he had a great
yeah,
relationship with hierarchies. So anytime I wanted to communicate with him, try to any approach, he was reaching out to manager and saying I'm
right.
taking the time from him, even during the stand up for like half a minute. And so I was the approach you point out. My question is with the three C's. Would this
Mhm.
apply with somebody who is bullish in that order?
Yeah. So my rough version there is I would be curious to know if you were showing up as clear, curious, and connected in those interactions. Like what levers for change, did you have?
Mhm.
Um, because often and think about, I mean, here's the thing. Our only leverage for changing other people's behavior is changing our own. Right. We can show up in different ways. And sometimes that's not enough. Right. I also want to be clear. I got a question a few weeks ago about this, about like, well, does this work in highly political organizations where, we have to play politics or maybe there's this and the other thing? And I said, you're never, you are, you have to think about what it means to be clear with someone. And what you choose to be clear about. But in general, what I find is that these things improve your personal effectiveness. That doesn't necessarily mean you can fix everything, that you'll always get the result that you want. So would it work? I don't know. I can't predict. But I do think I oftentimes find when people are that when we show up in these ways, we know we've done our part to contribute to the best possible outcome, even if we didn't get there. And so oftentimes we're more at peace with the situation as a result. Like I gave it my best shot. I was clear about how this behavior was affecting me. I was asking them, about what they wanted, how they wanted to address it. I was trying to stay connected with them in terms of saying, like, I get that this may not be behavior that you are fully conscious of or aware of. I'm not asking you to become a different person, but what I am asking is, would you be willing to work to shift what you're saying in these ways? And maybe, and when we do that, we often come out of it going, it didn't work, but I don't feel like I made it worse, right? I feel like I gave it my best shot. That's kind of how I come at it. Is that, I'm curious how that lands with you. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I completely understand. In fact, from previous experiences, this wasn't new to me, but in the past, when I had dealt with something similar, building relationship has been one of the effective ways that had worked, but
hmm.
not with that individual.
Yeah.
It was a little bit different.
Yeah, man, it doesn't always work.
Yep.
Yeah. What other questions can I try to answer here? Aha, if there's something, yes, Nick, have you published anything on this? So there's a little bit of stuff. Actually, there's two things. There's one thing I'll point you at right away, which is Allison and I have a couple of YouTube videos, which I should have thought to grab. Let me share one other thing with you first, which is I put together a little page that has the slides for tonight's talk. And also at the end of it, you'll find that worksheet that I talked about that sort of lays out. It's got here's how you might play in a conversation. Here are techniques for, as we say, dancing and things like that. But the other thing I can point you at is, again, I'm just pulling it up real quick. Thank you for reminding me of this. Our YouTube channel for helping improve, and in particular, these are some videos, and particularly this one is one where Allison and I sort of talk about this. And in fact, that's the
All right, Paul, it's the moment we've been waiting for.
And actually, in just the we did a LinkedIn Live last week. That this last one has us kind of walk through that whole planning process. So a couple of things out there you can look at and point to. Hope that is helpful to you. What other questions can I answer?
I have a suspicion, at least in the situation that I was thinking about, was how there's sort of a balancing dynamic. When someone's overly rigid, then I probably live more on the vague end. And if they are super uninterested, I get very aggressive about my questions.
and it's good to know kind of what triggers you into one of those traps, because I will sometimes respond. I will go vague with people sometimes. Like they get vague, and so I'll get even more vague, right? But like recognizing what that dynamic is, yeah. And so it's I find it fascinating to kind of think about what is it that when I get knocked off balance, because when we're at our best, right, we do have a tendency to show up and say, here's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? What do we do about this? Like, how do we build partnership together? It's when something happens, when we're existing in those conditions of stress and anxiety, right? When we're actually trying to do something super meaningful that's hard, that we don't always show up that way. And this is kind of a way that you might find your way back to that sort of place of balance. And it's not easy. I sometimes describe the difference between something that's simple and something that's easy. Simple is running a marathon. Just start running and stop 26.2 miles later, right? Describing it is trivial. Doing it, on the other hand, is not easy. So different, and it's the same thing with these conversations where there's often simple but not easy. And I've got time for one more question if somebody's got something.
While we're thinking about the question, I would launch our event feedback. Just 2 simple questions if you guys can ask. And while everyone's answering our poll, I would ask you, Paul, so train the messengers, in your experience, how does it go and how long does it take from your like practical experience as a coach and trainer? Do tell about that.
So I do, one of the things that I train people on, right, is change management. And one of the things that I ask people that always upsets them is, how do you want people to resist change? Because what you actually want when someone sees that there is a problem, that's an unforeseen consequence that's going to show up of creating a change, you want that information. Now, you might still go ahead with the change anyway. You might go, okay, we noticed this. So I'll ask, like, how do you want them to resist change? And people go, what? And I said, when somebody is going to push back because they think that there's a problem that you haven't anticipated, how do you want them to raise that in a constructive manner so that you can hear it? And that's often a really useful way in to this, because that's when you're training your messengers, right? You're actually telling them, when you see a problem, here is how I want you to raise it, right? But then also, so that's one part of it, right? To actually set an expectation that people are going to bring those things up. But then also, so there's 3 parts to it. 1, there's that, right? Tell people how you want them to bring up problems. 2, ask repeatedly, right? Because by default, people won't believe you, and they also aren't in the habit of doing it, right? What problems have we discovered recently? What do we know? That I know that I've mentioned, as I've told you, I want you to bring up things that, they're unforeseen. And so you have to start doing that. You have to build the habit of asking, of getting curious. And then the third thing you have to build the habit of is reacting well when people bring up problems. Because if somebody brings up a problem and you shoot the first messenger, guess what? You're never going to get another one. And so that's the third piece. You have to be prepared for it. You have to plan through it. And I find for any individual, like I often work at the individual manager or groups of managers levels. And those habits take 6 to 9 months to build, right? Before you start to really see the effects, right? Or before you really, and in some organizations, it doesn't happen, right? Imagine trying to go from that pathological state, right? Where they really are shot as opposed to ignored. I think in a lot of organizations, people who bring up problems get ignored. If they repeatedly bring them up, they get fired. I worked in an organization once where being labeled as negative was an extreme career limiting move. It was like because it was an organization that really valued being positive, and as a result, they couldn't hear problems in a constructive way. So part of it is also just recognizing, where are you starting from, right? What is your any cultural shift has to start with the current culture and going, what's even possible from where we are right now in the next few months? How can we start moving things? So there is no, here's how long it takes, because it also depends on where you're coming from. But I do think that it takes that, in particular, that takes a lot longer than people expect that it would, because it's a habit, right? You've just got to be doing it. You've got to be doing it repeatedly. So I'm going to ask one last question in the chat, which is, I mean, I put this stuff out there and it lands with all of you, and I never know what piece of it is gonna resonate with different folks. So I'm just curious, what's been the most useful thing for you from this meetup here? What are you taking away from this? If you would think about that for a moment, share that with me. That would close the loop for me to know that I'm not just putting it out into the world and not knowing how it lands. Yes, they do. People do experience you. Mm-hmm. Every conversation is a small building block to change. There's a wonderful quote from Fierce Conversations from Susan Scott, who says, "No single conversation is guaranteed to change the course of a relationship, of a career, but any single conversation can." And that's for me, that's the key piece of this, is like, none of these things are guaranteed to shift things just in one shot. But the more that we show up as clear and curious and connected, the more opportunities we have to actually shift things in ways that are really, really useful. So I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to and with you all here tonight. My contact information is there in the chat. Easy to find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to email me. I'm paul@helpingimprove.com. Always happy to answer questions about this. I've got, as I shared earlier, a link to where you can download the slides, the worksheet, some other resources. I write pretty regularly on the Helping Improve website. I do a lot of work with managers and helping them to actually put a lot of this core work into practice. Allison and I co-teach a class called Managing Amazing People, and Clear, Curious, and Connected is one of the 3 pillars of that course. And then I also do a podcast with my colleague Karen Gimnig, so weekly between 10 and 20 minutes, where we talk about interpersonal relationships and also a lot of group facilitation work, because Karen and I both have that as our background. So we talk about group dynamics as well. It's really fun for the two of us who have actually some pretty different backgrounds and perspectives coming together on problems that inevitably what we're talking about is something that's showing up with one of our clients in some way. And
Yeah,
how do we...
that's how we met you. We met you when you were facilitating the retreat
Yep.
for the Agile Alliance Board.
Yep, I remember meeting you in San Francisco in October 2 years ago, I think
That
it
was
was.
me in Volker, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that is all that I have for you here tonight. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Stop recording.